Julie and James Hawkins were at the dentist, 2 hours from their ranch in Arthur County, Nebraska, when the call came through. The smoke was moving toward their land. Julie got behind the wheel. James got on the phone with their 2 kids, Annie, 17, and Ward, 21, walking them through how to start the tractor, get the disc running, load the trucks and trailers, and prep the water rig. When the couple got back to the ranch around 5:30 in the evening, James looked west and saw what he described as a storm front moving in. Except it wasn't a storm. It was a wall of smoke miles wide. The fire line was already 2 miles east of a key landmark that meant it was close. Very close. They ran. Ward cut fire breaks around the hay yard with the tractor. Julie found her cow herd and guided them down into the valley. James and Annie outran the fire and made it back to the hay yard. They turned on the irrigation pivot, moved the horses, moved the saddles and equipment, and pressed everything they owned into a tight defensive perimeter. And they survived. Their ranch survived. But not everyone around them did. I'm Tyler, and this is Crisis Alert Live. Comment below where in the world you're watching from, because what happened in Nebraska starting on March 12, 2026, is being called the worst wildfire disaster in that state's recorded history. And the full weight of what it destroyed is only now becoming clear. The Morrill Fire ignited on the morning of March 12, 2026, in the Panhandle region of western Nebraska. It was not supposed to be wildfire season. It was early March. But the conditions that day were not early March conditions. Yes, temperatures had been running well above average for weeks. The region was in severe drought. Snowfall across the previous winter had been far below normal, leaving the grasslands parched and brittle. And then, on March 12th, the winds arrived. Not a typical Nebraska wind. A 70 to 75 mile per hour sustained blow from the northwest that turned the dry grasslands into a fuel system with no off switch. Rancher Dusty Wilson, a 4th-generation producer from southwest Arthur County, described the Morrill Fire as a fast-moving, overwhelming event. Northwest winds at those speeds meant firefighters' efforts were essentially no match for the wall of fire moving west to east across the landscape. The fire didn't creep. It ran. Families across the fire zone described the same terrifying dynamic. By the time you could see the smoke clearly, the fire was already close enough that you had minutes, not hours, to make decisions about what you could save and what you were going to leave behind. By the time night fell on March 12th, the fire had already consumed tens of thousands of acres. By the time federal wildfire monitors published their first full assessment, the Morrill Fire alone had become the single largest wildfire in Nebraska state history, ultimately burning 643,074 acres across Keith, Arthur, Grant, Garden, and Morrill counties. To give you a sense of what 643,000 acres actually looks like, it is larger than the entire state of Rhode Island, a single wildfire. In Nebraska, in March, Governor Jim Pillen described the fires collectively as one of the worst natural disasters in Nebraska history and confirmed in a press conference that the Morrill Fire was electrical in nature. Power infrastructure that failed under extreme wind conditions and sparked the blaze. The previous single-year statewide record for burned acreage in Nebraska was just over 503,000 acres, set across the entire year of 2012. The Morrill Fire alone shattered that in a week. But the Morrill Fire was not the only fire burning. 3 other significant blazes ignited across central and western Nebraska around the same time. The Cottonwood Fire burned 128,036 acres south of Interstate 80 near the communities of Brady and Gothenburg in Dawson County. Its cause still under investigation as of this writing. The Road 203. Fire scorched 35,916 acres in Thomas, Custer, Logan, and Blaine counties, burning through a portion of the Nebraska National Forest near Halsey. The steep, remote terrain made it brutally difficult for crews to access and fight. The Anderson Bridge Fire burned 17,400 acres in Cherry County within the Samuel McKelvey National Forest southwest of Valentine. Combined, the four major fires consumed over 827,000 acres of Nebraska land across a single 2-week period. Nebraska had never seen anything like it, not in any living memory, not in any recorded history. Governor Pillen declared a state of emergency, deployed Nebraska National Guard troops to the fire lines, and called on the mayors of Omaha and Lincoln, Nebraska's two largest cities, to send additional personnel and equipment to the western part of the state. National Guard, H-60. Black Hawk helicopters flew water drops over the most active sections of the Morrill Fire. Firefighting teams from across Nebraska, from Iowa, from surrounding states converged on the region. At the peak of the response, hundreds of firefighters, guardsmen, aviators, and volunteers were working the fire lines around the clock under red flag conditions, meaning high winds, low humidity, and critically dry fuels made every spark a potential disaster. A cross-country storm system that brought snow to other parts of the Midwest brought only more dry, windy conditions to the fire zones, making the battle even harder in the critical first week. And in the middle of all of it, on the first day the fire ignited, an 86-year-old woman named Rose Mary White tried to escape. Rose White lived in Arthur, Nebraska, in Arthur County, in the direct path of the Morrill Fire. She was born there. She was raised there. She spent her entire life there, on the same homestead her family had called home for generations. On March 12th, when the fire moved across the grasslands at speeds that gave people almost no warning, Rose White was trying to get out. She didn't make it. Governor Pillen announced her death at a press conference on March 14th. She was one life lost in a state that was losing hundreds of thousands of acres around her. Dusty Wilson, an Arthur County rancher who grew up just miles from Rose White and whose own land burned in the same fire, found out she was gone while he was still watching the smoke above his ranch. He said the hardest part of the whole disaster wasn't the burned pastures or the destroyed fences. It was losing Rose. He remembered her for the things she built around family. Halloween was her event. Cookies and rolls she baked herself. Photographs she kept of neighborhood children over the years. "We'll definitely miss Rose," he said. "All this other can be replaced." That sentence, "all this other can be replaced," came from a man standing on land that had just been burned down to the dirt. It took a certain kind of character to say it. The physical losses across the fire zone were staggering. Rancher Glenna Sherfey told a Nebraska TV station that approximately 95% of her grazing land was gone, and 95% of her fences were gone too. Replacing fencing alone can run up to $15,000 per square mile. Across hundreds of thousands of acres of burned range, that arithmetic becomes almost incomprehensible. Miles and miles of wire fence reduced to ash and twisted metal posts. Hay stored for winter feeding, gone. Outbuildings, gone. For the ranching families of the Nebraska Sandhills and the western Panhandle counties, the fire didn't just take what they had. It took the ground they stand on. Grassland that takes years to recover. Topsoil in the Sandhills that is fundamentally different from anywhere else. Fragile, sandy, built over centuries into a specific ecosystem that cannot simply be replanted like a cornfield. Nebraska Extension livestock educator Randy Sainer put the livestock picture plainly. Between 25,000 and 45,000 cows were not going to have summer pasture in 2026 because of the burned ground. Not displaced temporarily. Simply out of grass, with no alternative available on the land they're supposed to be grazing. The sandy soils of the Sandhills add an additional layer of danger to the recovery that most people watching from outside Nebraska would never anticipate. In the Sandhills, you cannot simply let the land rest and put the cattle back at the first sign of green shoots. Rancher Evans, speaking to Farm Progress, explained the problem clearly. That soil up there is sand. If you graze too early, the cow's hooves would dislodge grass roots, and then you have nothing. You read that right. Graze too early, and you don't just delay recovery. You destroy the root system entirely and set the land back by years instead of months. Ranchers in the hardest hit areas are being told that full summer grazing in 2026 is simply not going to be possible across much of the burned territory. Some ranchers could begin limited grazing by midsummer in areas with better soil. Others, in the deepest Sandhills, may be looking at 2027 or beyond before their land can carry cattle again. Travis Wenzel and his family, also from Arthur County, were evacuated on the evening of March 12th, when the fire was described as moving straight toward them. As the wind shifted, the fire changed direction and spared their ranch by 3 to 4 miles. "We are so thankful for all they've done for us," Wenzel said of the firefighters who worked to protect homes and structures around him. He knew how close it came. He knew what was happening to the ranches that didn't have 3 to 4 miles of margin that night. The broader agricultural picture beyond Nebraska's borders adds more weight to what this fire season means for the country. The 2026 wildfire season came in hard across the entire Great Plains from the start. Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska collectively saw more than 1 million acres burned by mid-March. Nebraska's fires alone burned acreage that was 118% above the 10-year average for that point in the season. And this is happening to one of the most important beef-producing regions in the United States at a moment when cattle numbers are already historically tight. Retail ground beef prices were already up more than 20% from the previous year. Livestock analysts were already projecting lower cattle slaughter and reduced beef production through 2026 compared to 2025. Now, tens of thousands of breeding cows are without summer pasture. Fences that would take years to rebuild are gone. The ripple effects from the Nebraska grasslands will eventually show up at every grocery store in the country that sells beef, and those price movements will be invisible to most of the people experiencing them. Nobody at a supermarket in Ohio or Georgia is going to see a sign that says, "Ground beef is more expensive this month because 643,000 acres of Nebraska ranch land burned in March." They'll just see the number on the shelf, and it will be higher. That is how the destruction of one state's grassland becomes a quiet tax on every household in the country. The response from Nebraska's ranching community was, in the face of all of this, something remarkable to witness from the outside. Ranchers from other parts of the state drove hay and fencing supplies toward the fire zone. Neighbors from other communities showed up to offer labor. Gordon Livestock Market, Grant County Fairgrounds, Oshkosh Truck Shop, and a network of drop-off and pick-up points across western Nebraska became nodes in an improvised supply chain built entirely by people who understood what other ranchers were facing, because they had faced it themselves in smaller ways in other seasons. The Nebraska Cattlemen Disaster Relief Fund opened for applications. The Nebraska Department of Agriculture stood up a hotline to connect donations of hay and feed to producers who needed them. Governor Pillen signed an executive order to provide emergency relief to farmers and ranchers whose livestock feed and supplies had been severely impacted. Dusty Wilson said the outpour of generosity had been amazing. "We've had just terrific response from ranchers in other communities donating hay and fencing supplies or offering to come help with labor," he said. James Hawkins, reflecting on what his family had survived and what his neighbors had lost, said, "God is a big God, and He can send rains and heal our land, yet the damage that has been done is going to take time to heal. There will be rain again in the Nebraska Sandhills. The grass will come back. The fences will eventually be rebuilt. But the 827,000 plus acres that burned in 2 weeks of March 2026 rewrote every record Nebraska had ever kept for wildfire destruction, and the families who ranched that land will be measuring time in their lives as before and after this fire for the rest of their lives. Rose White won't be there to see the recovery. The homestead where she was born and raised and spent 86 years of her life is gone. The album of neighborhood children's photographs, the Halloween traditions, the cookies and rolls. All of it stopped on March 12th, when the fire that would become the largest in Nebraska history came across the grasslands at 70 miles per hour and didn't give warning enough. This is Crisis Alert Live. If you want to help, the Nebraska Cattlemen Disaster Relief Fund and the Nebraska Sandhills. Rancher. Fire Relief Fund are both actively accepting donations. Drop a comment below wherever you're watching from. And if you've ever driven through the Nebraska Sandhills on a summer day and seen those cattle ranches stretching out toward the horizon, think about what those families are looking at right now. This is their land, their livelihood, and their community. The recovery starts now, and it is going to take